I remember when I joined advertising in the mid 80s, it was considered down market to sort of use Hindi in anything, and which is absurd given the fact that in India, only a tiny fraction of people, speak English. So if you look back on the last World Cup, which is where you see the largest assemblage of advertising in one place, the quality of advertising was pathetic. I mean, it was sad. It has huge capabilities. You are losing something as a result. It is possible that technology will evolve enough so that we don't lose that. So I think not all brands have to scale up to 1,000 crores. I think this is an unsustainable model, and it is based on greed rather than on anything else. Cinema has changed. It is now open to new forms and new modes of storytelling that are much more suitable for urban sort of creators. We are looking at we look at 40% growth year on year as being peanuts. Here, the rewards are not that great. For that untapped creativity, that pent up creativity that has existed in the larger population has suddenly has sprung forth. When you've done that, there is always a voice that keeps you real. There's always a voice. You've heard the voice of the street.
Welcome to Masters Decoded Season 4.
What was your wake-up call? What got you to all of
Honestly,
How do you overcome self-doubt?
so first and foremost,
How do you do that emotional quotient? How do you bring that up? My next guest on today's podcast is Santosh Desai. Santosh is MD and founder of Future Brands, a very innovative company looking forward to invest in upcoming brands. Santosh himself is a veteran in marketing and has some amazing perspective on how marketing has evolved over the years. Santosh, using his experience in marketing, is now able to invest in a very unique investment strategy in brands which are upcoming and really taking the world by storm. So if you want to learn about startups and more importantly, some unique ways of investment, then you should not miss this show. So without much further ado, let me get on with it. Hi Santosh, welcome to Masters Decoded Season 4. Really glad to have you on the show today.
My pleasure to be here, Anis.
Santosh, when I was looking at your LinkedIn and when I was looking at your, I saw top voice and it didn't say top voice for what. And then when I doubled a little bit in your company which you run and the profile which you have, it just fascinated me. One question which really comes to my first, and I want to break through that, is you've seen brands evolve, right, over the last 3 decades in various different ways. This entire concept of brand has transformed in many ways, right? So do you want to share your perspective? What that transformation have you seen, what it was earlier and what it is now?
Yeah. No, so it's interesting. Brands have had a long history in India. They've been around for ages. In fact, you look at some of the multinational brands, they are over 100 years old.
Yep.
So, I mean, so do brands do go back. But in the early days, actually, what happened is the brands were largely a mark of assurance.
Yeah.
It had two roles. One was mark of assurance. You had the unorganized sector, the quality was variable. So brands at a very basic rudimentary level gave you the assurance of quality.
Yeah.
The other role that brand played, because of the fact that the consuming class was very small, so they became status signifiers. And if I go back, in time, the kind of advertising when say cigarettes advertising was allowed, or when you look at coffee, there was a small cocoon of very upper class people,
Yep.
living the good life. I mean, so a lot of advertising representations tended to be so either absolutely mainstream, talking to the mass sort of an audience, or this very rarefied little cocoon. That was what advertising tended to be,
Yeah.
but limited,
Yeah.
because speaking to very few people. And I think and also it was very elitist in the sense that a lot of advertising was in English. Even for categories like biscuits and all, which were mass categories, you had advertising which was in English. And I remember when I joined advertising in the mid 80s, it was considered down market to sort of use Hindi in anything, and
wow.
which is absurd given the fact that in India, only a tiny fraction of people speak English.
Yep.
The idea that your local language you thought of as being down market was just a sign of the kind, and also the kind of people who were in marketing, the people who were in advertising came from a small little sort of a class and
Yes.
community.
Yep.
I think so. That was then. Gradually, the market opened up. We started seeing also a lot of MBAs who come from, who actually, while being still privileged, come from a relatively larger, more diverse group,
Yep.
came into the client side and therefore the brand side, and the consumers' voice started mattering a lot more.
Yeah.
So brands became much more open to consumer voices. You had much more use of local languages across the country. You had brands that started looking and mining consumer emotions for insights. And so you had this whole, I think in the 90s, you had this whole regional language and local language revolution,
Yeah.
where a different kind of people came into the business and created a completely different kind of a brand. So I think that was what happened then. Over the years, then of course we've had the influx of technology,
Mm-hmm.
which has made a big difference in the way brands are conceived, in the way marketing is
Yeah.
practiced. Today, for instance, the way marketing is practiced is completely different. There is much more data, there is much more science at one end, and on the other hand, there continues to be a lot of sort of focus on the consumer, because change is so rapid
Yeah.
and so dizzyingly fast that I think to keep track of changing consumers is quite challenging.
Yeah.
So you have now, of course, the new phenomenon is of the D2C brands,
Yeah.
where you have the direct. So they have a whole new class because of the fact that there is market access that is easy, there is
Mm-hmm.
media access that is easy. Everyone can, anyone can get on the net
Yeah. Start a
and sort
company.
of start a company,
Yeah.
right? And it's not necessarily cheap, but it's easy.
Yeah.
So I think you have a whole new category of creators who have come in uh, across the board, but certainly also in the brand space, who are creating brands that they want to
Mm-hmm.
buy.
Yeah.
So it's much more personal. They are much more targeted at much smaller and more clear kind of niches, and we are seeing therefore this whole phenomenon, and they're funded because there is of the availability of capital, and this new kind of a funding ecosystem allows that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we are seeing a completely new kind of a brand that is being created. It has its challenges and ups and downs, but it is a new universe there. So I think over the last 40 odd years or thereabouts that I have been in the business, there have been changes across the board in several different ways.
No, and I would love to pick each era, and I'm sure this will take 4 hours to just pick each era out. But I want to talk about some of the pivotal moments which have happened. Right, you spoke about 90s, and one of the other big infusion which happened was cable TVs, which never existed. I still remember, there was one TV amongst a community, and people would come together to watch that one TV, and Doordarshan was the only channel. But then with the advent of Z in India and a lot of other channels coming about at the same time, which brought a lot of regional content to bear, which was not accessible to many of us. Now, but when you think about TV as a medium, which has unfortunately lost its path over the years, right? Uh, how do you feel today marketers are looking at the linear format, which is called, uh, are looking at advertisement in that space, right? And you've seen that transformation in the last 4 decades in a big way. Uh, and linear TV has lost its interest. Do you think is that right statement?
I think that is largely correct. I mean, you can nuance it, but it's largely correct.
Mm-hmm.
I think what you've seen, television when it came was like this explosion that happened,
Yeah.
right, in our lives, both in terms of entertainment when cable television came,
Yeah.
and in terms of advertising. Along with it, and it changed so many things.
Yeah.
It made local languages that much more accessible. It changed storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
which became much more inclusive, much more fun. In fact, some of the, if you look at go back to the 90s and the and the knots, you will find that some of the most entertaining bits on television were the
Oh
advertising.
yes.
I mean, there was a time when advertising was really was and people discussed advertising avidly because it was so entertaining.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was a time when television created the whole cult of the celebrity. So television did a lot of things, right? Now over a period of time, what has happened is, of course, because of the linear format, and has faced challenges. One is from technology,
Mm-hmm.
because you come, which is just much more geared to the individual now.
Yeah.
Every individual has their own personal way of consuming media. They're, so everyone is a different kind of an animal when it comes to consuming media. They
Yeah.
have access which is personal and individual.
Yeah.
So I think that changes and fragments the idea of having Hum Log or something with 90% viewership is, or a Mahabharat with 90% viewership, cannot even be imagined today. The
Yeah.
best you can do is a World Cup or something,
Yeah.
but even that is a relatively a very small proportion of India. So I think so. Media is part of it. technology, of course, leading that change. The other is also, I think, in some ways, people have and creation
Hmm.
has moved from formal creative producers
Yeah.
like the advertising agencies.
Yeah.
Today, you find creation is now a cottage industry.
Yeah.
Everyone has access to the internet, and
Yeah.
if you look at some of the reels in an earlier time, TikTok videos,
Yeah.
the YouTube videos, the kind of creativity that we see, that is a is teeming, I mean, yeah, across the country. And the primary source of creative energy in India has, even in the commercial space, even in the small sort of video space, the has moved completely from the advertising industry
Hmm.
to these independent creators. So advertising has lost energy. So if you look back on the last World Cup, which is where you see the largest assemblage of advertising in one
Yes.
place, the quality of advertising was pathetic. I mean, it was sad.
Yeah.
And I think that part of the problem. So part of the problem is on the supply side, the media.
Yeah.
The ecosystem has changed and fragmented, and therefore there's very little television can do. Just because it doesn't cater to
Yeah.
people's needs in the same way as OTT, etc. does. But the other part is also that in terms of creators, the energy and the creative energy that used to animate the industry has is nowhere near the same.
Yeah. Why do you think so that's the case? Why do you think the creative space is becoming so bad? I would say it's not even creative anymore, right?
Yeah.
Why is that becoming that scenario? And it's not just India phenomena, it's becoming a global phenomena as
Global
well.
phenomenon. I think there are several factors that go into it. One is, I think, there is a drain. There is some sort of a drain that has happened of talent.
Hmm.
So it's just more lucrative to be in the OTT space or be independent creators and make have the independence and freedom and still make money. Cinema has changed. It is now open to new forms and new modes of storytelling that are much more suitable for urban sort of creators
Yeah.
to become part of that community. So I think that is one source of loss. The other is the fact that I think the business also has become much more commercially driven.
Hmm.
It's much more, it's a commercially driven, and b, it is internationally controlled.
Yeah.
So therefore what you have is an an enormous kind of focus on profitability
Hmm.
at the cost of creativity very often. And the agencies have, also because of the fact that the business has fragmented so much, with so many specialist skills being available,
Yeah.
with digital becoming, and has taken so much of the money away, that you also find that from the business itself has become far more complicated and far more revenue and profit driven. And therefore I think that is part of the pressure that a lot of the creative industry feels,
Yeah.
when they, as against an earlier time when there was much more room
Hmm.
that was available to invest in talent, to invest in, and where brands also were much more willing
Yeah.
to experiment. Now experimentation happens on the digital side.
So Santosh, you mentioned that earlier you all had a lot of room, right? And a lot of experimentation now is happening on the digital space. But today, when I also talk to a lot of marketeers, there is that thing, we can't have one single template anymore. While there can be a single template, but there needs a lot of focus on personalization. Like if you just look at India as a market, people say there are four Indias, right, which exist within India. There is the urban, the true urban, then there is urban of sorts, like, and then there is urban rural, and then there is rural, and then they also talk about the real rural who don't have access to any media as well. So
Right.
there are these dimensions which exist, and now they want to personalize. Now personalization, when you look at India, which has so much of diverse cultures, diverse perspectives, perceptions, it's crazy. Now people want to get to that. Now why do you think that is becoming such a big theme? Because when you go back to 90s, you had one template which appealed to everyone, like everybody would see it, and people would get aspirational with it, right? When I remember the famous Cadbury ad,
Right.
that girl dancing on, it was aspirational for all of us. It was not only for person who was playing cricket. So why do you think that has become such a big norm these days?
I think part it is. I think it's an interesting question, because I think at one level what is happening is that it is a product of the fact that we can do it.
Yeah.
Earlier we never had the ability. Now you have the ability.
Yeah.
So you have the ability to do it. So now you want to figure out as to what does that get you. I mean, when you are able to personalize
Mm-hmm.
what so, and in theory, being able to tailor a message to an individual is always better than being part of a collective.
Yeah.
But that theory, I'm not sure is it may sound counterintuitive to say it, but that is not the absolute truth.
Yeah.
It is true, but it's not the absolute truth, because what happens is that without having a sense, see, when you consume brands, you feel like you're part of a collective.
Yes.
You derive energy from the fact that other people are seeing the same thing as you are responding in the same way. You get reassured by that fact. So there is collective communal storytelling has historically been a very powerful tool. We grow up on
Yeah.
the same myths. We don't All of us don't grow up on individual stories. We have a
Yes.
shared pool of experiences which makes us belong to any community. So
Yeah.
earlier brands were a way of belonging to communities, and particularly in India, which is a collective society where we draw
Yeah.
so much from our relationship with each other. We are not individuals in a fully formed sense.
Yeah.
We are in the process of becoming individuals. So therefore, this idea that by being able to speak to individuals in their personal capacity is somehow superior.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that is you can only do it when you automate, right? So you have
Yes.
to do, so because you can't, no human being can be creating individual messages for everybody. So you have to create
Yeah.
it's a template of another kind where you are automating
Yeah.
based on certain kind of responses. Now you can do that, but as of now, and AI will change this maybe in the future. Therefore, your stimulus that you go to them with is not rich enough.
Yes.
You can do a small little ad, right, which uses the words that you believe will trigger a
Mm-hmm.
positive response,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't create the kind of rich experience that advertising of old used to do, the Cadbury's ad, for instance, of old used to do. So I
Yeah.
think what you are seeing is, I think, this a sort of a transitional phase where there is a fascination with new technology. It's a new toy that you're playing with. It has
Yes.
huge capabilities.
Yeah.
You are losing something as a result. It is possible that technology will evolve enough so that we don't lose that, so that we are actually able to craft really rich stimuli to individuals.
Yeah.
And you can see that happen. It'll happen. And in which case, we'll overcome that problem. But as of now, but even then, there is some power in a collective. When we watch the same film,
Yeah.
there is, we don't want to watch films that are catered and created only for us. We want to watch films in a hall with other people. We
Agreed.
want to create the shared energy.
Yeah.
And I think when that is gone, then I think there is a loss.
Yeah. So talking about films, and which is linked to one thing, which is characters, and there are quite a few questions on characters which I have. But one of the first question on the characters, like there have been some recent experiments, especially in India as well. I'm sure you've seen Manoj Bajpayee's ad where he starts speaking in different dialects, and then Shah Rukh Khan's ad where he starts referring to common kiranas which were there being shot depending upon where you are based off. While it was very interesting, it was not believable because Manoj Bajpayee is speaking a language which
Right.
people will not be able to relate to, right? Is that while there is a moment of aha in the consumer mind, but there is also a moment of, hey, I don't believe he's speaking that language, right? Or he's my person I relate to. If that company is taking that truth to that extent, hey, Manoj Bajpayee is your local person, right? Which is not the case. Do you believe that's where the can do and should do question comes out and should be
No,
asked?
I think that's yeah. I think that's very well framed. I think the can do and should do question, because I think that's the thing right now. What you want to,
Yeah.
you're flexing your newfound muscles, right?
Yeah.
You're saying, oh, I can do this. Oh, that's so cool, right? And some of it will work, but not all of it will work, because right
Mhm.
now the mode is not so much does it work as much as it's so cool I can do this,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that's the current, I think, challenge is that there is, I think, a little more of the, again, I think a little bit we are all children with a new toy, and we are enjoying the experimentation with the new enhanced capabilities that this toy has.
Yeah.
And over a period of time, I think we'll figure out how to use it well.
With these new toys is also, and you spoke about creators, right? Today you don't need, earlier when the ads would get created, you would have the elitists also show up in those ads, right? You would have Amitabh Bachchans and Amir Khans and Aishwarya Rais of the world show up. Today a lot of ads get created by common people. Like we've never seen those faces. Uh, how is that changing and putting a stress on the elites as well in many ways, right? Do you think that's becoming a very interesting trend?
Well, look. I would say that it's not as if the celebrities have gone out. In fact, there are celebrities in a lot of advertising. That is, I think, what is
Yes.
interesting, and I would sort of agree with what you are saying is in a slightly different way, is the fact that earlier the celebrities were only those who were mega celebrities. They were either film stars or
Mm-hmm.
creators. In India, largely
Yeah.
these two classes have been celebrities. But you needed to be something. You needed to either perform on a big screen or perform on a big stage in order to be called a celebrity. Today, influencers
Mm-hmm.
is a completely new breed that has come in that
Yeah.
are not that are celebrities to their own small community, but the outside world otherwise is clueless about them. So, you'll have
Yep.
a bunch of people who are absolute heroes in their little community, but nobody else, know them from Adam. They're like totally
Yep.
faceless otherwise, right? And so therefore you
Yeah.
have this new kind of a class of quasi celebrities that has got created, who
Mm-hmm.
behave like celebrities, who earn like celebrities, but are celebrities of a very different kind. So I think that
Yep.
also that has advantages, because what happens is that when these people front brands, they do so in a way that is extremely relatable. So your local sort of a makeup person in a small town who has become an influencer tells you how to
Yeah.
use and choose a lip shade which is so relevant
Yeah.
to their immediate milieu. They will talk about the
Mm-hmm.
idea of makeup and how what makeup means, not from the lofty
Yeah.
perch of Paris runways, which is what brands do, but from the perch of
Yeah.
saying you have to go to a wedding, you have to go to a PTA,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It speaks from a very, very local vantage point, and I think that changes the relationship consumers have with brands, because it allows them to connect in a way that you could not connect when you were using the Aishwarya Rais of the world.
Yeah. So, when you talk today to brands, right? Where does the character conversation lead to? Are brands today still okay with the celebrities, the Bollywood, Tollywood, or any wood celebrities, or they are okay with the local influencers, creators? Like, where is the preference moving towards as you talk to
See,
many big brands?
it depends, depends on the kind of client and kind of brand. So there is one client for whom a
Yeah.
celebrity is a default option. So okay, you have
Yeah.
nothing to say. You are not, thinking too much about it. So when in doubt, getting the celebrity, and that is seen to be actually synonymous with brand building for a lot of people. Oh, we've got
Mm-hmm.
so and so celebrity. That is our strategy. I mean, so beginning and end
Yeah.
of strategy is hiring a celebrity, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you find that is beginning to change, and you find there are a lot of marketers on the other hand now who are more seasoned, who use influencers as a default idea. Now how many influencers do you
Mm-hmm.
use, what kind of influence do you use? So I mean that has
Yeah.
but I think both of them are props, and both of them are still crutches. In a
Mm-hmm.
classical sense, it is possible to build brands without either. It is possible,
Okay.
but I think they hasten brand building in many ways. They target it more sharply for individuals if you do it right. So I think we are seeing the rise of more and more brands that are clued into. So if very often particularly if it's a brand run by a local Indian entrepreneur, if that person is themselves not on social media, then
Mm-hmm.
that world is closed. They have no idea what an influencer is, right?
Yeah.
So very often, I mean, this is a part of education that happens for people as they get a little more involved. Then they begin to see the advantages of using. Otherwise, they think there is nobody. Who's this person? This is nobody. Why should I spend lakhs of
Do you
rupees?
come
Sort
across?
of
Do you come across
yeah.
brands, big brands like these? Founders are
Big,
nowhere to
yeah,
be
big
found
brands, but
digitally.
necessarily not necessarily. They will no, be
The
entrepreneurs,
prominent
individual
ones.
entrepreneurs, regional entrepreneurs. They may be big brands, but there are brands that are totally sort of still are making their way and feeling their way around the digital world.
Hmm. Very interesting. Now, Santosh, you spoke a lot about the brands and how they're looking at the individuals as well, right? But when you look at these individuals, they can also cause a lot of harm. And we've had those scenarios, right? Or the brands cause a lot of harm to the individuals. And there has been this age old debate which is happening within the industry about and it's happened now in the fintech space specifically. A lot of financial influencers are being reprimanded by SEBI and by RBI that they are not authorized advisors, and they are advising on certain things. But if you look at it on, if somebody's talking about healthy biscuits as an example, or lip shades, but they may not be using those brands themselves, where do you bring those two together, and how do you manage what the brand is asking and what the individual who's the protagonist who's going to be there, that their demand is? How do you balance the two together?
No, I think that's a good question. I think look, it's like this. When you open up any new, and this is like opening up a totally new universe, right? We've opened up the digital world.
Mm-hmm.
In
Yeah.
the early days, there are no rules,
Mm-hmm.
and so
Yes.
therefore it's the wild west. Everybody is doing what they can and what they can get away with, right? And there are no rules. There's nobody to hold
Mm-hmm.
them back. There are no norms. Everybody's feeling their way around. So, which is what we have seen. We've seen this with the wild west of the digital world, at play here.
Yeah.
Over a period of time, you will start seeing regulation come in. You've seen SEBI come in for the fintech guys. You come ASCI, which is the Advertising Standards Council of India, now makes it mandatory for anybody who's a paid endorser to declare the fact that they are paid endorsers. Earlier,
Yeah.
that was not the case. You have the whole phenomenon of dark patterns, which are used to sort
Mm-hmm.
of goad consumers towards purchase without their being aware of it. So you have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
misuse. Whether it is of these individuals who sort of are propagating something that is of interest to them, but not in the interest of the consumer. So I think that exists. That's something to be careful about, and I think it's a process by which I think we are seeing that process begin to play out, where there is some order making that is coming to this wild west.
Yeah. And when you talk about these Wild West, do you see these Wild West only in certain pockets of digital? Or is, when I say digital, is it the medium, like let's say in the TikTok space or in the Instagram Reel space? Because those are fairly new spaces as compared to a linear TV, right? Do you see those are still, there are certain Wild West kind of top mediums which are still out there?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you look at. I mean, Twitter is the ultimate. It is a sewer. I mean, it's not just the Wild West. I mean, you look at what is
Yes,
happens
I
on
agree.
Twitter. It is. I mean, fortunately, I mean, it's not the most active space for brands, but in the political and
Yeah.
the cultural arena, Twitter is a
Mm-hmm.
cesspool. It is an absolute cesspool.
Yeah.
X now. So, and then and it's very difficult to regulate. Although there are some self-regulation efforts, even there you have community notes, etc. But
Mm-hmm.
so you do see that on all social media sites. It's by its very nature. When you democratize a medium
Yeah.
so much, where everybody has access broadcast rights, which in the history of
Mm-hmm.
humanity you've never had, where everybody has
Yeah.
broadcast rights, right? So when you have that, you're bound to have a lot of rubbish that comes up, and you have
Yeah.
to find ways of being able to sift through that rubbish. So I think there will always be pockets of the internet that will throw up trash. Reddit, for instance, you will find that. You will find it that on most
Yeah.
social media sites. You will find, but I do think that brands have become a little. Again, they have wizened up. They have become a little smarter, but to regulate it is not easy. And I think a lot
Yeah.
of brands are struggling with how to get that right.
Hmm. Let's switch topics. And there's one thing that you mentioned earlier on, like today anybody can create a brand, and I can also sit at home and come up with an idea, and I can start creating a brand, right? It can be just my initials, AM, and it's there a little bit. Today, to be very transparent, I'm trying to do something around AM now.
Right.
uh, these concepts of creating brand, and you being a brand company developing brands, big brands, right? Where do you see brand building really moving towards, right? Any person sitting at home with a laptop today can create their own logos, can create their own brand guidelines. There are tools which allow them to give them ideas, and they can tweak those ideas and then make it their own. Where do you see that space? And then companies like yours, is there a threat, or is there an opportunity, or is there like an overlap which is there in both? which will continue to
Yeah.
exist?
No, I think there is both an opportunity and a threat. I mean, both are true. I mean, the threat is the fact that,
Mm-hmm.
of course, the fact that why would you come to a specialist, sort of an outfit? So what we do is we help, brands, which have got, which are in the early stages of creation to get their strategy right. We help them sort of,
Right.
uh, and we create brands of our own also, in the same way. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what we do. So we are both an advisory sort of company as well as a brand creation company. So I think for
Mm-hmm.
us the opportunity is the fact that there are a whole bunch of people who have come up, launched their own brands, and then realized that it's not that easy, because and that's what has
Yeah.
happened. I think there was a time when, I think 2 or 3 years ago, to create a brand was genuinely easy because the funding ecosystem was very benign. It was open to all ideas. The funding ecosystem has become much more disciplined now, and it's not easy to raise
Mm-hmm.
money, nowhere near as easy as it was a few years ago. Secondly,
Yeah.
digital has become much more expensive. Facebook and Google have are squeezing brands
Yeah.
and are extracting a lot out of brands, and therefore earlier it was very easy and cheap. Now it is still easy, but it's not cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the other factor that has happened. And thirdly, competition has just gone through the roof,
Yeah.
where everybody, because everybody comes up with the brand of their own, eventually consumers' appetite is limited and
Yeah.
bandwidth is limited.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the opportunity comes from the fact that because there is proliferation, there is a second order of clarity that you seek, and therefore there is room for organizations like ours who they come to. But at the same level time, because everybody can create a brand, there is always greater competition, and to that extent there is a threat. But I
Yeah.
think it's much more opportunity than threat.
And just building onto this and speaking about competition, today I see there are so many companies now claiming that they can build a brand, they can do marketing well, they can do all of that. Do you see consolidation happening? Because at one point there was a big wave of consolidation which happened in your space, right? You now talk about those big media companies which did a major consolidation and they became the house of brands themselves. Do you see that happening soon within your space as well, because there's so much of proliferation happening?
Not immediately,
Okay.
because I think the honest truth is the reason why it will not happen is because it is not lucrative enough.
Hmm.
What the point is that, yeah, what happens is that when it comes to, unless a business aggregation yields disproportionate rewards,
Yeah.
there isn't a fundamental sort of a need felt to aggregate businesses. Here the rewards are not that great. So in time they might become greater. But for instance, our model is the fact that we we are a venture builder company,
Hmm.
right? And a venture builder. So we are purely dependent on the success of our clients
Yeah.
for our success, right?
So how
And
does the
you
success
have
model
very large.
works? How does the success model
So
works in your space?
no, so the success model is the fact that we would, when we work with a company, we take an equity stake in it on the basis, and what we provide are, we might put in some money, but
Okay.
it's not a cash forward sort of a proposition. It's a brand forward proposition.
Hmm.
So what we are doing is essentially what we are providing them with is with service
Mm-hmm.
on brand thinking, on brand execution. We provide them the ability to actually scale up their brand.
Mm-hmm.
That is the service that we provide, and in return for which we take equity. So this model, to my mind, has, it's not as if they haven't been very large players.
Yeah.
They've been huge players,
Yes.
and there are huge players who have come and gone also.
Yeah.
I mean, you've had Thrasio, for instance, which was the biggest
Yeah.
player in the US, which is in insolvency. So I mean,
Yes.
it's so I think that, in fact, we think that there is more scope for a smaller, uh, and what we do is much more early stage work. So
Mm-hmm.
we actually are, in that sense, it's a much lower cost model, which starts at the very early, and where we are sort of scaling up to a certain level, and after which we will want to divest,
Hmm.
and to hand it over to somebody else who has more money and is a more capital forward kind of and a proposition.
Yeah.
So I think for us, I see this as I actually see this as a more sustainable model than those who come in with big money, acquire brands at a huge cost, and then are talking about scaling it up from 100 crore to 1,000 crore, I see that as a much more challenging task than trying to get to 100 crore.
Hmm.
So in that sense, I mean, it's how you read the market.
Yeah.
Our reading of the market is that this is a better space to be.
Sure. And do you typically invest in, or or when I say invest, maybe it's not a right word, but do you partner, or do you make those right strategic moves with certain size? Is it like people who are 0 to 10, or 1 to 10, or 10 to 50, or 50 to 100?
Pretty much. We are our bulk of our partnerships or creation are. See, we create brands, of course, which is from zero. So that there is
Okay.
absolutely zero to one. That is
Wow.
absolutely zero to one. But in most cases, it is either zero to a 10 crore, or it'll be at best it might be 0 to 30. I
Hmm.
mean, it is not. But we are looking at really small, very small, early stage ideas that we believe have potential.
Interesting. But how do you then take it forward? Because taking a punt on a business which is at zero, right? It almost means that you will have a VC arm which will within your own company, right? Which will be evaluating the markets, will be evaluating trends. Trends, you all follow trends, so nobody, but trends from an overall business environment perspective and all of that. So, do you have like an arm which just focuses on that now?
So my own company actually does a lot of the trend work. I mean, in
Yeah.
the sense that we do a lot of consumer work, and
Yeah.
I think overall, even the past experience of the other people, who are involved,
Yeah.
comes from working with consumers at a in a very sort of focused and really closely working with consumers. So we back our ability to be able to sort of spot an idea that has consumer resonance. Whether that is right or wrong, time will tell,
Mm-hmm.
but we back our ability to do that, and there is a process that we follow internally, but we feel confident that we have the kind of people that we need to make that judgment.
Santosh, talking about people, and and you mentioned you have the right level of people, and this is more personal question for you than largely for your organization. When you started your career in the space of brand building and brand management and advertising space, I'm sure you've had your own share of learnings where you've done variety of jobs, right? And I've heard people in this space, and I know a lot of people in the ad space, that you had to even take reels and move from one place to another. And you've done a courier job also, where you're taking the reels of the ads and going to the production house and yada yada yada. And then I'm sure you have a lot of these stories. When you look at that era of building careers in this space versus now people doing an MBA, doing some level of advertising degree, coming and saying, "Hey, I want to build brand day one." You know, uh, do you see a big transition which has happened over the last decades?
Yeah. No, I think so. I think, although I also did an MBA and came into advertising, but that didn't help.
Yeah,
You still have to go through the grind.
yeah,
But I think, and at the risk of sounding like an old fogey who says that, "Oh, in my time it was so difficult, and
no, no,
you
no,
guys are
you are
easy."
not.
But at the but no, but there is some truth always in that. But I think what has changed is that, see, technology has changed. It's like, I remember that since you know you don't have the kind of problems with printing, you don't have the concept of artworks,
Yeah,
you don't have the you don't have a spray painter who's trying to finish whatever, or you don't have a quarter tone finish. I mean, those things will be alien to people because technology is more. I used to write presentations and type them out on a electric typewriter, and then all of that, and stay
yeah,
up nights at studios to get the slides out. So all of that was part of, I think, what it did. I mean, apart from the fact that you had to do it, you didn't have a choice, was the fact that I think it kept you grounded, and it kept which is always a good idea, which is the reason
yeah,
why even MBAs go through a sales training. Even if you're going into marketing, there is a certain, it's important to sort of, from the world of theory, to get a root shock in the early stage of the real world. Yeah. So it doesn't matter what that form it takes, but just that principle, the fact that from a certain ivory tower existence to the reality of the world, that transition, there should be a mechanism that allows you to make that adjustment. And I think what you find today is that that mechanism is not always present. And
hmm,
in the absence of that mechanism, what happens is the fact that, you know, also it has other consequences. In your head, what happens is that when you've done that, there is always a voice
Yeah.
that keeps you real. There's always a voice. You've heard the voice of the street. A lot of it has to do with growing up. I mean, I can't say it's my advertising early experience only that did that. A lot of it did I because I grew up in a very middle class kind of a way, and so therefore there is a certain groundedness. Even that, I think that today's generation does not have that opportunity. They live far more. My children, for instance, live far more cloistered lives. They are
Yeah.
much more. They don't have the kind of so particularly in an industry which thrives on consumer connection.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the absence, so even you've not had the opportunity to have connected with more kind of yeah, real things while you've grown up, nor do you get that opportunity to rough it out a little bit in the early days. I think it can have a limiting effect on you in your career. But beyond that, I mean, I don't, I'm not one who accords the blame to the younger generation as being A or B or C. It's just circumstances. I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's the content. I didn't ask for a middle class upbringing.
Yeah.
I got it, right. I certainly did not enjoy sitting at the printers or sitting in a studio
Mm-hmm.
waiting for my artwork to come out, but I had no option. So I can romanticize it when I look back on it, but at that time I hated every minute of it.
Yeah. So we all have done our share bit of those jobs which we all hated, and hindsight that now we all think and we say, oh, we've done all of this, but because of that ruffling and not being in that cocoon, which today in a way many of the generations are today, has that impacted creativity? Because being through that process also invoked a lot of thoughts, right? Today with the advent of phones, somewhere we are kind of in that scroll mindset, right? We keep scrolling and don't get time to think, which has an impact on your creative skills and creativity. Do you think creativity as a skill is also deteriorating over a period of time?
I think in the industry it is, but overall it is not. I think in
Okay.
the industry it is deteriorating. I think it clearly is. You can see the effects all around you.
Yeah.
Even there, I would shy away from using a blanket term like deteriorating. I think in some formats I see it sort of becoming sterile, but on some other formats it's still because you're learning the digital format, so there is still some you do see some creative sparks.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it is outside the industry, like I was saying earlier, where I see a lot of creativity, and there, because you have a lot of people who never had access to any creative form, any
Yeah.
form of creative expression, they suddenly have now access, and so suddenly you are seeing people who would in their wildest dreams never been have been able to create anything, are creating something, and therefore that untapped creativity, that pent up creativity that
Mm-hmm.
has existed in the larger population has suddenly has sprung forth. And therefore I actually think that we are part of a time when there is a creative revolution happening. It's only that we don't see it. We are seeing, for instance, cinema, although Bollywood seems to have lost its way, but we certainly are seeing new kinds of cinema. In OTT we are kind of seeing new kinds of storytelling
Yep.
that is taking place. On reels we are seeing again a completely new kind of stand-up comics. We are seeing this whole surge of stand-up comics
Yep.
across the class spectrum. So I think it would be, and music, we are seeing some very interesting indie sort of ventures. So I think there is a lot of creativity that is taking place, a lot of creative expression. Only in the advertising and the marketing in the space, I think strangely, I think we are seeing the opposite.
Yeah, and just talking about the advertising and the entire space of brand building and all of that, if I look back, there was one thing which was unique, which was an ecosystem, right? Which was there. And if you got into that ecosystem, you could learn, you could thrive, and all of that. That over a period of time, that ecosystem has kind of shrunk. And then there has these parallel universes which have come up but have not been linked as an ecosystem. Do you think that bringing that ecosystem or having that ecosystem built in this new space and this new era will enhance what's happening right now? Because if I look, and just talking about the advertising space itself, if I look at the kind of ads, y'all thrived on each other's knowledge and ideas, right? Which really helped you all build further your idea stories. Somewhere it's getting dispersed so much that that ecosystem is not enjoying it anymore.
Look, I have been outside the advertising industry in a formal sense
Yeah.
now for over 15 years, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I am not sure exactly how that interconnectedness that used to be, the fact that if another agency did some work,
Yeah.
that would instantly goad you to do something else. And there was always that healthy playing off
Playing.
of each other, which
Yes.
and there was a very shared kind of a connected kind of a world.
Hmm.
I cannot say for certainty that that doesn't exist. I don't know enough today to be able to make that statement, but
Hmm.
I mean, I do feel that because a whole lot of other worlds have also grown up around the advertising world. I think the fact that the centrality that it had, that the cohesion that it had,
Yes.
has got scattered,
Yeah.
and so you have a lot of related. So everybody saw it in the OTT world. All of them, somebody or the other, some connection with advertising you'll always find.
Yeah.
In cinema now, you find some connection with the ad. Somebody will have made an ad film. Somebody would have worked somewhere. So it's an interconnected world, but it perhaps does not quite work as a network,
Yes.
where it kind of supports each other, possibly. But I can't say for sure, because I've been out of. You need to be inside the industry to be able to sort
Yeah.
of make a fair assessment of that.
Yeah, and we all have grown up watching movies and all, which kind of showed this ecosystem and how it thrived and how it had its undercurrents also and underbellies also, but it had its own thriving moments and how it really brought those stories out into the market. And speaking about worlds, Santosh, just pivoting back to your current company, uh, what are one or two areas which is really fascinating you now and you really want to build brands in that space, which is becoming very interesting?
No, lot of areas are fascinating right now. For instance, there are a lot of areas that is I find. So the areas that have energy in India, for the last few years, in fact, no, it's not just recent, but it's for the last few years, are, certainly in the personal grooming and beauty industry. You have a lot of excitement that has happened.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of interest in the new areas, the meeting ground between food and health.
Mm-hmm.
Food is an area of great interest, because I
Mm-hmm.
think there is so much that has happened and so much that is still happening in food. I think our whole palette has opened out, and there is so many sub kind of a threads
Yeah.
that and currents that you have in terms of food, which is fascinating. So I think these are some of the areas that we are looking at. We are looking at food. We are, in a big way. We are looking at beauty. Fashion always continues to be of interest, and we are also looking at health,
Okay.
because those are areas where we find that a lot has happened, but a lot still can happen.
Yep. I'm wearing devices on my hand right now which track my health every day, every minute,
Yeah,
and many of those startups are actually from India. So that's
yeah,
fascinating
absolutely.
how that space is evolving. But when you talk about these spaces, right? When you look at food, scale is a challenge. Beauty scale is easily possible. Um, Health, again, it's possible, but it has a lot of regulations. It has its own aspects. Uh, the reason, what the question which I'm trying to get at is, picking a bet, that you are going to get only till here with this particular space, right? So um, how do you ensure that, okay, you understand that the limitations which that industry will have, but also when you talk about grooming, right? Today men grooming is becoming a big category, right? A lot of new brands are showing up in that space, and men are becoming serious, at least in India, about their own personal grooming. But it's still a smaller population. It's not a widespread news or a widespread adoption in that space. So how do you ensure that that there is that upper limit to it, and you will not be able to scale?
Yeah. No, I think not all brands have to scale up to 1,000 crores. I
Hmm.
mean, I don't think that is the mental model we have, that we must choose brands that are infinitely scalable.
Yeah.
We have to choose. We look at brands that are scalable, with but with profitability.
Hmm.
So there is a certain degree of scale. So you want the brand to be a healthy size, but you want it to be, and I think this is a VC driven mindset that we've gone into, where we are looking at, we look at 40% growth year on year as being, you know peanuts,
Hmm.
right? I mean, unless you are doubling every year, you don't think that you're growing.
Yeah.
I think this is a unsustainable model,
Hmm.
and it is based on greed rather than on anything else.
Yeah.
And we don't necessarily, if our brand grows at 100% every year, that is great. But that is not, if that becomes the basis on which you make investments, or the basis on which you make choices, then that is not sustainable. That is not. India as a market is shallow.
Yeah.
It is a shallow market, and if you do not find models that are not dependent on your, on your growing at a breakneck speed,
Mhm.
year on year, then then that's always going to be a problem. That's number one. Number two, since we are looking at very early stage, our role is to bring a brand to a viable size where the person who takes the brand off us is able to see potential for the next level of scale,
Hmm.
right? Fortunately, the funding ecosystem is kind of subdivided enough for people to take an interest at every level of of scale.
Yeah.
And so we are not looking to scale it you know to a huge level to begin with. We are looking to scale it at a level at which you can see potential, you can see profit.
Mhm.
And we are saying that whether it is a strategic investor or whether it is another organization broadly like ours, which comes in at a different stage of of the brand, finds it interesting for them. So that is our interest. But
Mhm.
overall, I have to make the point that I think more and more, I think brands and the funding ecosystem has to be alive to the fact that there is only so much by way of of annual growth that you can expect.
Yeah.
India as a market being what it is.
Yeah. These shams, and unfortunately, many of the startups have failed. The doubling growth and not having
Right.
profitability, burning cash flows, uh, is completely dwindling down. And it's heartening to hear from you that you are, because I have been through a lot of these journeys myself. I work in a corporate setup, and I have seen a lot of people say, "Oh, you don't have that growth, but hey, we have amazing profitability, which none of our peer groups would have, probably," as an example,
Exactly.
right? Because business is all about making money, right? And if you're just burning money, then it's not a business anymore. And it's heartening to hear that. But convincing a startup founder that, hey, you need to build business rather than burn money, is it easy for you when you talk to a lot of young founders and startup
Actually, it is.
owners?
See, the natural instinct of business. So a lot of, see, depends. So there are a lot of
Yeah.
startups who come from a family background of business,
Yes.
and therefore, for them, that is the way they've always seen business.
Hmm.
The business has always been made about making money. It is,
Yes.
this is a new world for them. They are in
Yeah.
fact scared of this. So there is one or kind of a entrepreneur who is comforted by the fact that you're looking at profits. But there
Hmm.
is another who has been seduced, or who has been by the idea of valuation, and are
Yeah.
in it because they don't necessarily come from a business background,
Hmm.
or even if they do, it's the next generation and has different ideas.
Yeah.
There, I think it can, the fact that, oh, so you're not talking about an exit which gives us 5x in 3 years, is something that takes time. But given the funding ecosystem, I think everybody recognizes it. I
Hmm.
think the fact that this is not something that needs too much convincing, because simply because people know today that the world has changed, and it is not what it used to be a few years ago.
No, the world has completely transformed in the last 18 months, I would say, with all the
Yeah, absolutely.
colossal failures which have happened in the market, not just in India, but globally, right? The global trends have forced a
So
lot
true.
of Indian folks to change. Now, Santosh, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I know you've taken some time out from your personal time off. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, and hopefully, the audience will glean a lot of insights and amazing nuggets from our conversation today.
No, thank you so much, Anis. It was an absolute pleasure.